In this video, I'm going to explain how to find the factors of a given polynomial, right? So that is the main agenda for this video. So make sure I stay to the end of the video. Now, this is the function that we are giving. We are giving x cubed minus 3x squared plus 3x and then minus 1, right? So this is to find the factors of this polynomial, or maybe you want to factorize, right? So that is the keyword. You are going to factorize this polynomial. Now your first step here is always look at the constant term. So what I mean by the constant term here, the guy who doesn't have a friend of x, right? So this guy here, he doesn't have a friend of x, so you consider this guy is carrying x here, this guy also carrying another x, and so finally this one is also carrying x. So the guy who doesn't have the x here is what we are calling the constant, right? So we are going to use, this is what we are going to use to determine the or maybe that should be our first step here. Now your first step after finding the constant here is that you have to find the factors of this constant, right? So what I mean by the factors here, display, if you don't know what a factor is, let me have the definition in the comment below, or maybe you're having issues of the factors of any number, how to find the factors of a number. If you don't know that, let me have or maybe comment down below, right? So we're ready to help you. So in finding the factor, this is just a simple number, so that's a negative one for maybe. So one here, the factors of one here is going to be what? Just one, right? So factors of one is just one. But here we are interested in the both positive and a negative. Is that okay? So meaning that we are going to have a negative one as well as a positive one, be the factors of the constant term here. Is that okay? So what are we going to use these factors? So once you have this one here, we are going to pick the factors one by one and plug that inside the function given to us to see which one will be equal to 0. Is that okay? So the key here mathematically is that when I plug the number, these values here into this thing, I must get equal to 0, right? So that is the step here. Is that okay? So that is what our aim here. Now, so let's try the negative one. So we are going to take this guy here and put it inside the machine and see if your outcome is going to be what? 0. So let's say for what? For negative 1, right? For negative 1, so f of what? Negative 1 here, right? So meaning that we are putting negative 1 into this function. So whatever you see the x, we are going to replace that by negative 1. That should be equal to negative 1 exponent 3 minus 3 negative 1 squared plus 3 into bracket negative 1 and then minus 1, right? So the aim, remember the aim here, this is the key. Is that okay? So the key here, where are we heading towards to? We want this thing to be equal to what? 0, right? So this is the key here, right? So this is the key. So let's do the calculation, the addition, the multiplication, the square, everything together, and see if you are going to have a negative. Here should be equal to negative 1, here should be minus 3, here should be positive 1, here should be what? Here tends to be what? Negative 3, right? So this multiplied by that should be negative 3 and then minus 1 here, right? So if you solve this, you should have let's do this one first. So here should be what? Negative 1, right? So here should be negative 3 minus 3 and then minus 1. You can see that this is not going to be 0. Is that okay? Here should be what? Negative 4 and then negative 7 as well as negative 8. Is that okay? So negative 7, which is not equal to 0, right? So the aim here is that our answer that we are going to have should be equal to the 0 here, right? So that is the aim. Okay, now let's try the 1. For the 1 here, we should have what? F of 1, that should be equal to 1 cube minus 3 1 squared, right? Minus 3 1 squared plus 3 multiplied by 1 and then minus 1. So here should be equal to 1. That should be equal to negative 3 and then plus 3 and then minus 1. Of course, this is equal to 0, right? Because this one cancel out, this one also cancel this. Okay, so everything is equal to, so hooray, so that was exactly what we are looking for. Now once you have that, or we know that if we take one out of these factors here into the functions, we are going to have what? 0. So the key here is that x, right? So the value given to, so these are the variables that we are dealing with x here. So x and then minus 1 equal to 0 is a factor. The reason is that if you solve this thing, that should be s equal to 1. That is exactly, sorry, s is equal to 1. That is exactly what we had here, right? So what we had here, Is that okay? So we say x minus what? 1 is what? A factor. Is that okay? X what minus 1 is what? One factor. Is that okay? So once you solve this and you solve this and you have the values of the x, the factors of the constant, you pick them one by one, plug that inside the function to find out which one will give you 0. So the one that gives you 0 is a factor. So how do you write that factor? You write it based on the variable given to you from what? The polynomial function, right? So the variables here that we are dealing with is just or x. Okay, so the x minus 1 here is what? A factor, right? So this is what? One factor. Now how do you determine the other factors of the polynomial? If you are getting some values from this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, comment down below if you have any question or what you want to see in our next video. Now let's see how to find the other factors. So once we know that the x minus 1 is a factor of this polynomial, right? So it's a factor. Now we know the reason why this is a factor. So our next step to determine the other factors is to use this one, this particular guy here, which is the chief driver here. That's what I call it, to divide the polynomial given to us. So we are going to use this one to divide the polynomial. That is what the so let me go here. So we have x minus 1, right? So let's use a different pen here. So let's use the red pen here for understanding people. So x minus 1, everything being divided by what? The polynomial given. So that's the x exponent 3 minus what? X 3s squared and plus or 3s everything minus 1. So this is how we are going to do the next step. Is that okay? So your first step is to find the factors here. So once you got the factors, you are going to use that factor to divide the polynomial. Let's see how to divide the polynomial. Now you have to now you are dealing with the x, right? So dealing in divisions of the polynomial, you have to deal with the x, right? So the values of the x here will be our headline. So what I mean by the headline is that this x here will go into, if you go back to how to do a long division, right? So if you have something like 5 being divided by 2, so what do? You say that 5 will go into the 2 how many times? Maybe 2. Is that okay? So use this one to multiply this, that will give us 4, and then you subtract, right? So you subtract, so here will give us 1, and then you proceed. Okay, so it's the same idea that we are going to use, but just that here we are dealing with variables, so we are dealing with letters, but the idea here remains the same as this one, right? So here, this x will go into the s exponent 3 how many times? So this is 3, of course, that should be what we can have 2 out of that. Is that okay? So x squared, right? So we can have 2 of the x out of the 3. So this one multiplied by this will give us x exponent 3. The same thing multiplied by this one. So x squared multiplied by negative 1. That should be what? Minus what? X what? Squared. Is that okay? So x squared under s squared, s exponent 3 under s exponent. We don't have anything to multiply here, guys. So we do what? Our subtraction, right? So here we are going to have negative 1 minus what? 0 here. That should be what? Negative 1. So 3x minus 0. So that should be what? Positive what? 3x here, right? So positive 3x. And then this one minus the, remember, look at something. So we have a negative 3x squared minus, right? So look at this, minus of x as exponent 2, right? So this is something that you have to pay close attention. So that should be equal to negative 3x squared. Here will tend to be positive, right? So x squared. Is that okay? So here we have a negative. So the x and the s squared and s squared are the same. So we just deal with the numbers. So meaning that we are going to have negative 3 plus 1 plus 1. That should be equal to negative 2x squared. Is that okay? So if the variables are the same, we just deal with the numbers, right? So negative 1 plus 3 here, that should be negative 2. So here is going to be negative 2x squared, right? So what about this one? So this one vanished, right? So x exponent 3, s exponent 3, x exponent 3 minus s exponent 3, that should be equal to 0. So this is what we are having, right? So now you take the next step from here. Now I guess you should pause the video and take it from here, right? So the same step as just like the previous one. So here we are going to have a negative 2s squared here. Oh, so this guy will go into this one how many times, right? So look at something. Here will just be equal to negative 2x. Is that okay? Because the x is squared here. Here you have 1x. So we can get that x out of the 2 here, right? So we have a negative 2x here. So we'll use that to multiply everything. So this one multiplied by that will give us so negative 2x squared, right? So negative 2x multiplied by negative 1, that should be a positive 2x, right? So positive x, and then finally you had a negative 1. So we are going to subtract. Okay, so you have a negative 1 minus 0, that should be negative 1. So 3 minus 2 here, that should be 1x, right? So of course that should be just x. Is that okay? That should be positive x. And then what about this one? This one vanishes, right? So we have a negative here. So negative 2 minus negative 2 here, that should be what? 0, right? So this one goes away. So we have our x here. Of course, this positive can go away. So we have x minus 1, right? So x minus 1 will be our next step here. So this thing here will go into this one how many times? This is so obvious, right? So maybe if I say 1 divided by 1 is just like 1. So what about the idea? So the idea here is that this x minus 1 will go into the x minus 1 how many times? Just 1, positive 1, right? Is that okay? So positive 1. So if you multiply this one by this, you are going to have the same answer. That should be x minus 1. So everything will be 0. So fortunate for us, the answer that we had at the down here is equal to 0. Now that we have the answer to the polynomial using the factor here, this is what we are going to have. So we have the something called in mathematics like a quadratic. So you have 2s squared minus 2s and then plus 1, right? So this is what the mathematicians or you the mathematician call what? Quadratic. It's okay. So the name is just a quadratic, but the most important thing is that you should know how to solve this thing. Just like you know how to solve this one. If you equate this one to equal to 0, you should be able to know how to do. So how do you solve this method here? There are three ways of solving this thing. Either you use the factorization method. Since the question is asking us to factor the polynomial, we are going to use a factorization method to solve this one. Once again, if you are gaining some values, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up for more videos like this. Now, solving this quadratic equation or maybe expression using the factorization method, you are going to have something like a repeated x minus 1, then x minus 1 being the two factor. If you don't know how to solve this quadratic, just subscribe to the channel, or maybe let me hear from you in the comment section. Then I'll make a very nice video on this, how to solve a quadratic equation. So if you solve this thing, you should have s minus 1 and s minus 1. In addition to this one, right? So making your three factors of the polynomial. So if you factorize any polynomial, you should have three different factors. Is that okay? So these are the factors that. So if you bring this one in addition, so we should have three different factors of the polynomial. Oh, they are twins, right? So maybe they are the same. So 1, 2, 3. It is not always the case that if you factor any polynomial, you should have answers that look similar, right? So they are different. That's also why you need to subscribe to the channel for me. What will happen if they ask you to find the zeros of a polynomial, right? So zeros of a polynomial, right? So if you want to see this thing, once again, let me hear from you in the comment section, and then just give us a thumbs up for us to know that you want to know more on this thing.